Our next speaker is, again, no stranger to MoveUP. Laird Cronk has been in the labor movement for a long time, first in a senior position with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and then being elected to the role of president of the BC Federation of Labor. Oh, how many years ago, Laird? 3 years ago. And just reconfirmed in that position at convention. So I will welcome Laird Cronk, president of the BC Federation of Labor, to come up to the stage.
All right. Hey, David. My glasses were fogging up. I couldn't see.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Look, I'm just damn excited to be in a room with a whole bunch of people. It's really, it's fantastic. I don't tell my communications expert folks, but I want to speak from the heart a little bit today about some really important things to the labor movement. So I might not be exactly on script. David's getting nervous on time already, but we've got some things to talk about. First of all, I want to recognize I am on the unceded territory, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh, speaking to you today. And I also want to recognize my awesome work partner, Suzanne Skidmore, again. I couldn't ask for a better work partner in the labor movement. And I want to thank all of you for what you do every day for working people in MoveUP. We represent all of the affiliates in the labor movement in British Columbia, almost. And you are amongst the most engaged in the labor movement. You really live solidarity at the Federation of Labor, and the work you do for working people is very impressive. And I also want to recognize we have two unions that represent workers at the Federation, United Steelworkers and you, MoveUP. And the staff that we have at the Federation is fantastic, and the work that you do representing them is equally important. So thank you for that. So what we do at the Federation of Labor is we act collectively on behalf of the labor movement. We don't have members of our own that we represent in the workplace. We are a collective of affiliated unions. In other words, you are stronger as a collective of members as MoveUP, representing every one of you. We are stronger as a labor movement when the affiliated unions join together and bring our collective strength to make life better for working people. So Suzanne's job and my job is to sit with the affiliated unions and put a circle around the things we agree on and to achieve those things. And it's particularly a poignant time with an NDP government to recognize that we need to look at the things we have in common and not waste that time, but achieve things for working people during that time that the government is in place, hopefully for some time. But historically, we know we had best do our work and do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. Today, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of our collective achievements, just a little bit. I'm going to not gloss over them, but go quickly, because I want to talk about some things we still have left to do. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have made some major achievements together, primarily in the last 3 years. And although these things sound like, and I'm going to talk about political achievements, although they sound like government actions, because ultimately they are, they don't happen without us. They don't happen without countless meetings with ministers or campaigns like the campaigns that you run, that we run, and we run collectively. So in very brief, some of the things that we've accomplished in the last 3 years, and I'll talk about the Employment Standards Branch, the Labor Code, and the Workers' Compensation Board. Screw the name WorkSafe, Workers' Compensation Board. So the Employment Standards Branch, we've achieved, coming back from 20 years of liberal destruction, many things. Although there's many more to go, we have achieved, and this is really important, for the first time in 20 years, the Employment Standards Act is the floor, whether you have a collective agreement or not. The floor is the floor is the floor, and it cannot be undercut by anything. That's important. Child labor in British Columbia. Child labor under the Liberals was not even documented. We had to find out how many children were working in heavy industry by WCB claims. This government has just brought in child labor protections for the first time in 20 years. The minimum wage is at $15.20 an hour, which leads the country much more work to do, but is a heck of a lot better than 10 years of no change under the Liberal government. And my favorite change to the Employment Standards Act, although I love them all, is we finally have, and still more work to do, but we finally have 5 paid days of domestic violence leave, with up to 15 weeks. With up to 15 weeks of protected time, if needed. Under the Labor Code, we made major advancements to successorship. Think of it as contract flipping. Think of workers that work in restaurants, let's say at the airport, and those restaurants that you see in the walkways change and they lose their collective agreement. That's been fixed. That gap has been fixed, and that's the collective effort of the labor movement. The floor also affects the Labor Code. A employer-dominated or rat union can no longer use a collective agreement between the employer and the rat union to undercut the Employment Standards Act and the Labor Code. And we reduced the time frame, and I'll speak to this in a minute on a different way. We reduced the time frame when you join a union between when you sign cards and apply to join and there's a vote, a mandatory vote, from 10 days to 5 days, to try and restrict the amount of time employers had, let's face it, to influence workers not to join a union. That was a good thing, but not a great thing. And the last section that we've made some major achievements on is the Workers' Compensation Board. Much more to do, but we've made some major changes. The wage rate that WCB calculates disability payments on was capped at $87,000 a year. We've managed to move that to $100,000 a year, which may not sound like a big change, but if you're on a disability pension, basing it off $100,000 is a heck of a lot better if you were fortunate enough to make that much money. And the other one that I'll talk about is the disability benefits, and this is a formula, so I won't go into all of the details. We have folks that are so expert in this, thank goodness. But there's now 2 ways that it's calculated for disability benefits: loss of function and loss of earnings. It was 1 way before, it's 2 now. That's better for workers. This was a good change. And specific to COVID now, the labor movement collectively has done tremendous work on COVID, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. But since the beginning of COVID, we at first achieved unpaid leave at the beginning for being off work because of COVID symptoms. And that time was unlimited, but it wasn't paid, but it was protected. Before that, you could be fired in British Columbia for being sick. A really big one is we achieved presumptive coverage under WCB. What this means is if you go to work and you get sick with COVID, heaven forbid, simply because you went to work, you are covered by WCB and you don't have to prove exactly how and where you got it in the workplace. It's presumed you got it at work because there's a higher percentage chance that's where it happened. This is big because you get 90% wage replacement, not the pathetic federal sick pay benefit. This was massive for the labor movement, and over 4,000 in August, by August, over 4,000 workers had accessed this. Sad that they had to. Tremendous that that wage was there so that they could concentrate on their health instead of paying the bills. As you know, we collectively pushed the government, and really pushed the government, and we achieved 3 days full wage replacement for being off for COVID. Was it enough days? No, it was not. But on top of that, we achieved a process to reach paid sick leave in this province for COVID and everything else. And that's coming January 1st, 2022. That is in legislation, and that is historic in this country we call Canada. We did that together. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we pushed hard to say when vaccines were available, it's not enough to be available. We need to make sure workers can access it. We need to make sure they have protected time to get there and that that time is paid so they don't make a choice between multiple part-time jobs, worried about being fired, losing pay so they can't pay the rent, and setting aside vaccines because of that. And we achieved that together. Look, we've done a lot together in a short period of time with an NDP government, and it doesn't happen without all of us. And you have been instrumental in that achievement. But now I'm going to talk about the things that we still need to do, because that's our collective job. And the first one is so fundamental. We need to finish the job on the labor code rule about how to join a union. Everybody in this room has the benefit of a union collective agreement. Everybody in this room believes in it, or you would not be here. We should fight for the right for every worker in this province, in this country, to be covered by a collective agreement. My friends, it's not lost on me the theme of your convention, which is breaking barriers and embracing diversity. Having a union collective agreement, although not perfect, is an equity increasing activity for the workers of this province. And we need to embrace that. It's not good enough that there's still a 5-day wait. You could have 100% of workers sign a card. And by the way, signing your signature is like signing a mortgage. It's like getting a driver's license. It is accepted legally. 100% of the folks in this room, if you all worked in a workplace, could sign a card. And you have to still give the employer 5 days to talk you out of it. Not good enough in the province of British Columbia. Not good enough. We need to remove that. So that's one that's on our list. And when the vote came last time, the Green Party, under a minority NDP government, scuttled the provision of what we call a one-step process that we just talked about. Well, Andrew Weaver's not there anymore. It is time to deliver for working people in this province. Let me talk about WCB. I'm a little emotional today. I'm not known to be an emotional person, but I was in Victoria yesterday, and I'll talk about that in a second, on a health and safety issue, and I just can't get it out of my head, and I shouldn't get it out of my head. But let me circle back to WCB. 2 years ago, Janet Patterson issued a report that the government asked for as an expert in WCB to say what's wrong with this system. The system fundamentally should work well. Workers are taken care of by the WCB when they're injured, and you either get them back to their their pre-injury state and back on the job in a reasonable time, or you compensate them for the injury that they suffered in the workplace. Unfortunately, for 20 years, the system was dismantled. We have fantastic union workers at WCB, but they're in a rigged system that they have to perpetrate. It is an insurance-style cookie-cutter mechanism that says, if you're anything beyond a basic injury that heals in a very predictable way, we're going to have a chart that says you should be ready anyway, and we're going to send you back to work and we're going to cut you off if you don't. The key performance indicator is how quickly they get people back to work. This needs to be brought back to a worker-centered system. And what I will say on this front, and we could spend the afternoon on it, but we don't have time, is the ombudsperson in British Columbia, not exactly a left-leaning a union activist, but a watchdog of the government, issued a report not long ago, a broken trust report, I'll call it, on an individual simply called Mr. Snyder. Mr. Snyder was a woodworker and lost tips of his fingers in a saw blade incident. And without going down the entire history of this claim some years ago, under this system, he was told he had to go back to work after a period of time because the computer chart said, you're better. All the doctors didn't. Mr. Snyder said, my hand's not strong enough to do my job. But they cut him off. He went back to work. And in a very short period of time, his hand went back into the blade and he lost it. They amputated it. And then they said, we're not going to compensate you at your original level because you weren't able to earn enough money. Now, you earned less money in the period in between, so we'll compensate you at that level. And he fought for years. And the ombudsperson said, WCB made that happen to him. They made him lose his hand. That's what we need to fix, my friends. That's what we need to fix in the province of British Columbia. We've run a campaign on this, and you'll see more, and you've helped us with this. We need a worker-centered system. We need simple things, like a Fair Practices Commissioner that helps workers navigate a very complex system. They shouldn't have to go to the ombudsperson in British Columbia. They should have somebody that can guide them through their own system that's paid for out of really our wages. And I said I was a bit emotional because yesterday I had an hour-long meeting. And I really want a big shout out to Steve Hunt and the steelworkers who have been fighting for justice for Sam Fitzpatrick for 12 years. And we met with the Attorney General and the Minister of Labour yesterday because the shortest version of the story is Sam was working in a remote part of British Columbia where there was rock scaling and a bunch of heavy industry and blasting. And a company named Kiewit that he worked for was found guilty by WCB of negligence and fined, and then the fine was reduced. Crown Counsel agreed to proceed to charges some years later. What happened to Sam was there were big machines working above him, and they were throwing boulders down that they were blasting down into the ravine, and then they would take them away, like 1,000 feet below. And for whatever reason, the workers were on a shelf below these machines, and they'd had some near incidents. In fact, just a few days before, a boulder had knocked out a big compressor right where Sam was working. Anyway, they ended up back at work. And the last words they know that Sam said was, "Let's just get this over with." He was working with his brother. And a rock came down and crushed Sam and killed him. I mean, it killed him. And then that rock went over the bank. And WCB said that they didn't do the job right, the employer. The health and safety wasn't right on that job. Sam should have never been in that position. That they killed Sam. And it was the second time in the history of British Columbia that we were going to proceed under what's known as the Westray Bill or Act on criminal negligence against the employer for that. Kill a worker, go to jail. And let me tell you, in an unfortunate series of events, 12 years have elapsed. And about a month ago, the Attorney General's office made a decision that there wasn't enough witnesses, and there was a whole bunch of reasons legally why a week before the trial, they were withdrawing the charges against Kiewit. Well, a common sense person would say if you've got enough time and you've got enough money, you can kill somebody for free. Or maybe the $250,000 that was paid through WCB. One more thing about this, and I'm sorry about the time, David, but we've got to talk about this. Yeah. At one point in this series, the police who wanted to go to trial said we can't do it because we've lost the boulder. They didn't have the instrument of death. Sam's father, who's since passed away, and I'm glad he wasn't around to see the withdrawing of the charges. Sam's father found the boulder with the blood-stained DNA still on it in Burnaby in a warehouse and got the charges back on track. This should have been prosecuted, my friends. So what did we do yesterday with the Attorney General and the Minister of Labor? We talked for an hour about Sam. We played a video of Sam talking, of Sam's dad talking. We made sure they heard every last minute and the effect on the family. And we asked the Attorney General and the Minister of Labor to do what we've been asking for 12 years. Train the police, have a dedicated Crown prosecutor, and make sure every time there's a serious workplace incident, there's a mandatory police investigation. That's what we need in the province of British Columbia. Okay, rapid fire, asbestos. We still don't have asbestos licensing of contractors in the province of British Columbia. This is a crying shame. I am a worker who has been exposed to asbestos when I was an apprentice in about 1986, because I didn't know any damn better other than to do what I was told and take a skill saw and saw through the side of a sawmill for electrical cable tray, and it was asbestos. And I did it for hours, and I don't know if it'll kill me or not. Something tells me maybe I'll be lucky. But I've lost a lot of friends. It's the #1 killer in British Columbia still. And we don't have licensing of asbestos contractors in this province, and we don't have training of construction workers and other workers on asbestos licensing. I am told, and I can't guarantee this, and I probably shouldn't say it because this will go into the interwebs. I am told we've got a reasonable chance of asbestos licensing legislation in the spring. That'll be the first time in the history of this province it's too late, but the collective action of this room and the labor movement to get us there is a very important moment to document, and whether we get it in June or we don't, we will never give up until we get asbestos licensing and stop the #1 killer of workers in the province of British Columbia. My friends, you know our 10-day paid sick leave campaign. I think I can boldly say if you don't know about it, you're not watching anything, because we're everywhere. You have been with us on this. You have amplified it. Let me just say one thing about it because we've talked so much about it. The workers are who are getting us through the pandemic. Governments can screw it up or they can do it well, but it's the workers on the front lines, whether it's supply chain, medical, education, childcare, construction. It's the workers who are getting us through. And 89% of workers who make $30,000 or less don't have paid sick leave, can't stay home, can't afford it, and their jobs aren't at home. And we're making them go to work because they can't afford to stay home, and we're spreading COVID. And on January 1st, 2022, we need 10 days to stop that forever. And the final thing I'll talk about is what's commonly called this shiny, flashy thing called the gig economy, sometimes coupled to the words precarious work. Let me tell you what it really is. It's the oldest game in the book. It is employers who now hide behind apps. They used to hide behind other things that says, don't look over here. These aren't workers. We're not an employer. They're misclassified workers. And when they desperately need work and well, let's personify one. Probably tonight, if you walked outside in Vancouver, somebody would be walking down the street or riding a bicycle with a big foil-wrapped box taking food to somebody, right? We all see that every day. The vast majority of these workers, whether it's in ride-hailing, whether it's in food delivery, and now many other, including now even industrial settings, are told you're not a worker. This will be good for you. You're not a worker. You'll sign a document saying you're not a worker. And even though that won't hold up legally, the worker doesn't know that, so they sign it because they need the work. Guess what they don't get? They don't get paid sick leave January 1st, 2022 if you're not a worker. They don't get the ability to join or form a union if you're not a worker. They don't get WCB coverage when they fall off the bike, keeping us home safe and convenient. My friends, the government doesn't get the revenue for all of the programs we need, and this affects everybody in the room too. Together, we need to stop the misclassification and underground, unfair treatment of workers by multi-corporations in the province of British Columbia, so they join with us in having rights like everybody else. So as I stand between you and lunch, a little bit over time, let me just say this. We've achieved a lot. And yet, as my dad would say, celebrate your victories. They're few and far between, but then get back to work. We've achieved a lot together. Every one of those needs more. And it's your job and my job collectively to set our differences aside, which we have done. Work collectively on the things we put a circle around. And while we have this government in office, continue to make changes for working people. See, our whole definition is like-minded activists who recognize our collective power will make lives better for workers, for their families, for their communities. Together, we've achieved much. Together, we have much more to achieve, and I am honored and proud of the support from MoveUP, your solidarity, the work we do together. My friends, let's finish this job.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. I forgot what you can do in person. You don't usually yell on the Zoom meetings. That was powerful and inspiring, and we thank you so much, Laird, for coming to be with us today. We don't have a thing to give you as a token of our thanks, but what we do have is a card, and we have made a donation to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society in your name.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.